Hi, I'm Bill Wilt of Assured Research. Thanks so much for joining this short webinar on the medical CPI, where we hope to help you think about the components of the medical cost index, the medical CPI, that are or are not or are not relevant for property casualty insurers. As we record this in the spring of 2023, not long after first quarter earnings season, a number of insurers, mostly auto insurers, reported adverse reserve development on a portion of which was attributed to accelerating medical cost trends. And they broadly in their rate filings are reporting seeing an acceleration in medical cost trends that's raising the cost of bodily injury claims predominantly, and leading to some distress in their financial results. Now, this comes at a time when the medical CPI peaked in September of 2022, 7 months ago now, at a 6% year-on-year increase, and for the month of April was just a 1% year-on-year increase over the prior year. And so one could say, gee, it seems odd that there's this manifestation of accelerating medical inflation now in insurers' results when overtly it should be decelerating. So what's going on? And we think we have an answer for that. So bear with me while I share my screen, and we will charge ahead. Good. Now this work is from our June Assured briefing. We are happy to share that if this interests you, and if you're not a subscriber, happy to share that as part of a trial to our work. But what we're going to do is show you a disaggregation and then a reconstitution of a medical price series relevant, in this case, for workers' compensation claims. I think there's applicability to auto insurance, which I'll talk about as we go through. Now, on the left-hand side, what you see here are the the components of the medical CPI. In bold, in numbers there, you see that letter A, medical care commodities, are about 18% of the index, and medical care services, the lion's share, at 82% of the index. On the right-hand side, you see the medical CPI only going back to 2016. But if we were to show this back to, say, the financial crisis era, 2009, 2010, you'd see that for a decade prior to the pandemic, the medical CPI was range bound between, say, roughly 2% and 4%. And it's only since the pandemic that it became more volatile. So why, when you look on the right-hand side and you see what is now a 7-month long decline in the medical CPI, why are insurers experiencing rates of accelerating medical inflation? We think that's because several of the series on the left-hand side are volatile for either pandemic or government distortion kind of reasons, or simply not relevant to the typical either auto bodily injury or workers' compensation, or really any bodily injury claim that's going to be reimbursed by property casualty insurers. I'll explain more on that, but leave this with this observation. We've specifically left the scale here on the graph quite wide, -20 to 30%, specifically because when we turn the page here and then look on the left-hand side, what we're showing you are those two major components of the medical CPI, medical care commodities and medical care services, haven't behaved too badly, although more volatile recently. But look at health insurance as one example of a price index that's 9% of the medical CPI. Look how volatile it's been really since the onset of the pandemic. And that's for some technical measurement reasons. I'm sure it's distorted because of some of the pandemic related governmental programs. But it's just one example of a price series that is either volatile for kind of distortive pandemic related reasons, or simply not relevant to property casualty insurers. When we look on the right hand side, Were we to do a bit of algebra, which we did, and extract the health insurance cost index from the medical CPI, we'd still end up with a series that looks broadly like the medical CPI has looked over the past several years. And that's because the health insurance is only 9% of the total cost. But when we go digging through the series and put them out on paper here as we've done, you see that there are other more heavily weighted components that are really just kind of look squirrely, quite frankly, over the last couple of years. Um, Look at physician services for Medicare and Medicaid services, for instance, how high they rose, and or at least in the case of Medicare services, the red line, how high it rose, and now it's fallen really sharply. Physician reimbursements constitute 23 excuse me yeah, do constitute 23% of the medical CPI, and you can add to that dental services, which are not particularly relevant for at least for most bodily injury claims. That's 11% of the series, and look at that line. It's been up, down sharply, now back up again. um, there's quite simply a lot going on in the calculation of the medical CPI that's just not relevant for property casualty insurers or what they pay for bodily injury claims. Now, one exception to that might be the PPI, Producer Price Index for hospital services, which is 24% of the medical CPI. There you see a series that, although not without some volatility, a more typical cost index that you might expect, one that's gradually increasing at a at a modest pace, but a steady pace, and it is increasing. So we take a step back and say, gee, if the medical CPI is too volatile and subject to distortions for to be relevant for property casualty insurers, what should they do? Well, for that, again, also a note in our June Assured briefing, we can thank the NCCI for their annual State of the Line report and two particular slides, which we've reproduced here, that show the typical roadmap, as we call it, on the left-hand side to medical cost drivers of a typical workers' compensation claim. Again, on the left, physician services, outpatient and ambulatory service centers being the major components. A smaller percentage of workers' comp claimants have to be hospitalized. You see the 12% there for inpatient. On the right-hand side, they've done a nice job of laying out the cost indices for those major categories. What I'd say is when you weight those together, you get cost pressures from 21 to 2022 of about 2.5%. So what we've done is go to the Producer Price Index, find what we believe to be the most relevant and or on point series that represent all those major cost drivers. And we show three of them here on the left: physician care at private payer reimbursement rates, outpatient ambulatory service centers, inpatient costs, and on the right-hand side, the three that you see there, acknowledging that for the cost of prescription drugs, there may be a better series, one that's seasonally adjusted and wouldn't be so volatile, but that's only 7% of the total cost. Medical supplies and other, which we believe to be lab and imaging costs, shown there. Point being, when you weight all those series together at the weights that the NCCI has provided, you have a reconstituted kind of medical price series that looks and behaves much more like you might expect a cost series measure to behave without all the distortions. And it's steadily rising. Now, you could absolutely say, gee, it's still low if it's in the 2 to 2.5% range, and it is. But it is rising. It doesn't look anything, as our main point, doesn't look anything like the volatile and very recently, over the last 7 months, declining or decelerating, I should say, medical CPI. So we advocate that insurers, and we sure many and most are, taking the medical CPI with a grain of salt and maybe tearing it apart and using its components. But if you're not, or if you want to learn more about the work that we've done here, we'd encourage you all to to reach out to us. If you're not a subscriber, happily we'll share this research note. And if you'd like to take out a subscription to our work, I'm happy to do that. Happy to do that as well and share our June briefing with you. So thanks so much for listening. Welcome your thoughts and comments. Have a great rest of your day.